Welcome to another episode of the Fit for Fortune podcast, where my guest today is one of my favorite people on the planet, my therapist, Neil Drew. Neil has worked in London's Harley Street for over a decade, has designed programs for the NHS to use UK-wide. He's worked with Olympians and a number of sports teams and has over 55,000 hours of therapy and sports work under his belt, which is insane. That's 24 hours a day for 6 years straight. He's also been my therapist for a good while and changed my life massively, and I have referred a good number of my clients to him too for the same reason. Disappointingly, I don't ever get any referral bonus, so I'd only do it because I truly think he's incredible. And all the clients I've referred to him said the same thing too, that their experience was life-changing. Today's episode will be a little bit looser one. We will see where it takes us, but I would love to talk about habit formation, how you can change habits, as well as how therapy ties in with it all, and just therapy in general, because I feel like a lot of people underestimate the importance of it. So weirdly, this last week I have talked to multiple therapy non-believer people, and they all said the same thing or asked me the same thing, which is, why would you want to bring up past experiences? How could that be helpful and help us change for the better? They must be buried for a reason, and bringing them up usually just makes me feel worse. What would you tell these people?
Stop being afraid of therapy. When we're born, we're all born whole, pure, perfect. We're all born with confidence, self-esteem. We're all born with a natural desire to grow and evolve and explore and learn. But what happens is, as we go through life, we have things that happen to us that cause us to feel negative emotions, or we have a negative reference. And these build up in the background, and we form decisions, beliefs, and meanings at an unconscious level about ourselves, the world, success, happiness, failure, whatever, as a result of the collection of the memories from our pasts and our experiences from the past, things we've done, things other people have done to us, things we've seen, heard. And what happens is, because the mind says, okay, that hurt me or that scared me, so I need to go on the lookout for that again, just in case this happens again. And the way that the brain works at an unconscious level, which is where our problems actually come from, is that part of our brain generalizes, globalizes, catastrophizes. It also is like a child in a way, in as much as that it takes things literally on face value and negatively about itself. So you imagine a child, for example, at school, and let's say they haven't been picked for the football team 3 or 4 times in a row. Let's say that they've fallen over in the playground and they've bumped their head and grazed their knees and they're crying and they're embarrassed by it. Let's say they make a few spelling mistakes reading out in class or something when they have to do the spelling tests. Let's say their parent calls them stupid several times. Let's say their girlfriend dumps them at 8 years of age or 9 years of age and then goes off with their best friend or something. Now, as a grown-up, you could look at these things and you can laugh about them. But actually, to the unconscious, it's holding on to them and it's using them as a reference point to determine what anything means in the future. So that person, for example, might form a generalized anxiety. They may well keep themselves to themselves as a result of these things. They might embarrass very easily or blush very easily. But they get so used to these ways of reacting that they pay no attention to it anymore, because they may have been experiencing these reactions for many years. And so they become accustomed to it. So to them, it doesn't bother them. They've adjusted their life to be used to experiencing those feelings. And then therefore they can then start to predict that they're going to feel a certain way in the future. But you see, back as a child, the brain may generalize, globalize, and catastrophize and say, well, I'm not good enough as a result of these collection of memories. So that I'm not good enough then is a generalized statement which then covers every part of their life, if you like. It's a bit like taking a paintbrush and dipping it into a pot of water. That water will change color. When you have a negative belief sitting in the background that you're not consciously aware of, that will act in the same way as tainting the way the brain functions, but its output, if you like. So when you re-explore or examine the causes of your problems when you become a grown-up, the decisions, beliefs, and meanings that were formed in those early formative years were real to the person at that time. But you also got to remember, in our childhoods, for example, we don't have life experience to be able to understand the meaning of events that take place. We don't have the vocabulary to discuss these things with the grown-ups and make these problems go away. So the brain then forms this decision, belief, or meaning, which sits then in the background and interferes with our normal way of being as we grow up. And as I say, we adjust to get used to it. But then it may link and connect to other things, which then explodes the problem, and then it becomes an emotional debilitation, a restriction to them. Or they might react in negative ways or wrong ways that are inappropriate or out of context to a situation. And then they go into therapy, and the therapist wants to go and explore the childhood to find the origins of these events. And when you explore them and see them, you realize that actually, hang on a minute, the meaning that I assigned to them back then is not true. That's incorrect. I need to reevaluate that. It actually means this instead, in light of my grown-up knowledge and experience. So that's why therapy is important, because nobody really truly knows what their mind is actually holding on to. And the problem is, as we go through life, we use our logical brain, and the logical brain says, well, okay, this big event that happened must be the cause of my problems, or this thing that's happened, I didn't start thinking that, feeling that, or doing that till that thing happened, so therefore that must be the cause of my problems. But that's the logical frontal cortexes that are at play there. That's the logical explanation. It must be these things. And we avoid looking at those things which we consciously dismiss as, oh, that can't be a cause of my problems. How could that possibly be the cause of my problems? Because it doesn't make logical sense. But to the unconscious, it does. And that's why it's really important to go into therapy. Because, I mean, think about it this way, right? And let me ask you a question, actually. Do you think it's possible to get to 12 years of age without experiencing virtually every negative emotion that we're capable of experiencing?
Probably not.
Probably not. In fact, in most people's lives, they probably will have experienced every negative emotion by the time they're 12 years of age. So therefore, technically speaking, the initial sensitizing events of what become our future problems will reside in our early years. But the logical brain says it must be something very big and powerful that's causing me my problems. No, it can be an accumulation of lots of little things that build up. And so it's then examining those and linking them, and then that's when you start to see the patterns, and then you start to uncover those negative decisions, beliefs, and meanings that are often influencing our emotions, reactions, behaviors, perceptions, all sorts of things.
Based on my personal experience, you don't need to even be aware of this thing that happened, and it can still affect you, right? That's why sometimes you need to dig a little bit deeper.
100%. Absolutely.
Can you potentially give us any examples on how people might have realized that things they didn't expect at all affected them in the present in like twisted ways?
An example that springs to mind is of a person that came to see me who had a fear of flying. Now, when they first came to see me, I said to them, what do you think is the cause of your problems? And this person said, well, I lost someone in 9/11. With the amount of flying I do, because they're a legal person and they work in big businesses in Europe and all around the world. And every time this person was going to a meeting, if it was in Paris or Brussels, which is quite close to obviously London, where this person came from, then they had to take medication in order to be able to do the flight. But if it was a real close meeting to home, then she was finding that the medication was affecting the ability to be able to concentrate properly in any event, in any meeting. So they had to sort this problem out. And also they were up for promotion to go and do Australia as well or something or other. So this was a really big deal, and they had to sort the problem out. So when I met them, I said, what is the cause of your problems? And they said, well, look, I lost someone in 9/11. With the amount of flying I've done, there's been a few tricky takeoffs, a few bumpy landings, and a few dodgy journeys. And, I've seen things going on with people on the plane. So somewhere in amongst all of that lot is the cause of my problems. So we get inside this person's head, and we go back into the past and to look for the origins of the problem. And it turns out that what happened was this person was born to a family that had a small amount of land. It was only a couple of 3 acres, but they used this land as a small holding, and they grew some fruit and vegetables on it, and had a few animals and a small amount of livestock. And every year they would go on holiday. And every year the nan and granddad would come and look after this property for them while they were away on holiday. And this person describes how when they're about 4 or 5 years of age, they're on holiday, and they come back from holiday and find out that her pet dog had died, which was also the family dog. And Grandad obviously hadn't said anything because he didn't want to spoil their holiday. And then she describes going away on another holiday about 8 or 9 and coming back and finding out that her pony had died. Then describes going away on a holiday, and another holiday about 14 or 15, and coming back and finding out that Grandad had died. So her fear of flying wasn't a fear of flying at all. It was actually a fear of what it actually represented. So when I come back from a flight, therefore, someone or something I love will either be dead or gone or whatever. So that was the actual driving forces behind this person's fear of flying. And on realizing that, the brain unconsciously was able to then reevaluate the meaning of these things. And so when this person went on their flights afterwards, the negative feelings had completely disappeared because the association to flying had now changed. And that's what I'm talking about in therapy. That's what we're doing. We're exploring those events to uncover the decisions, beliefs, and meanings, to then reevaluate those. And that's where change takes place.
I think also the problem is that we draw these conclusions and create these decisions, beliefs, and meanings with our baby brain. And then even if we do uncover them, as we look back at them with our conscious adult brain, they always look silly, and kind of we automatically discard them as opposed to seeing how it might have affected us.
Yeah. Yeah. Because, if I said to you, for example, can you remember what you had for tea 14 weeks ago on a Tuesday? Can you remember? No, you can't. How come you can't remember that? Well, because nothing untoward took place. It's resolved. There's no emotional attachment to it. So your brain has filed that away, fragmented it and filed it away. So it's like you probably can't remember a bunch of emails you deleted from your inbox a week ago. You won't remember things that there's a lot of information that just gets filed away in the brain because there's no need for it to be rattling around taking up our valuable processing space. But the brain will always remember and hold on to anything that's negative that has ever happened to us. Most stuff can just sort of sit there in the background, not really impacting us. But then there are other things which, because you see, the brain says, okay, this bad thing happened and it could happen again. So I'll go on the lookout through your senses to see if there's anything in the outside world that matches or resembles this thing. And then it says, oh, hang on, this thing that's happening now, that reminds me a little bit of this. It might be only 50% like it, but the brain says, no, there's a similarity there. So therefore it's the same. And then it gets a link to that other memory. And that's what's happening as we go through life. Our brains are constantly linking and connecting things. And that's why our problems grow and evolve. And they start to then begin to invade other areas or contexts of our lives. So, left completely unchecked, potentially, there's a risk that it can invade every area of our lives, potentially. So, yeah, that's why, going back to the original question, if you like, why therapy is important, because the conscious brain works completely differently to the unconscious.
Whenever I talk about therapy, I kind of have the same opinion on it as personal training itself, that most practitioners are just a little bit shit. So I know that you are qualified in basically everything you can be qualified on the therapy front.
More or less.
How is what you do and hypnotherapy different from what other people do? Because I know that a lot of people just go to therapy and they sort of start talking about very surface level problems and never dig a little bit deeper. So why do you do what you do, and what is it that you do?
Okay. Look, when anyone goes into therapy, or when anyone has any kind of problem in their lives, they think about it logically. What makes sense as to being the cause of my problems? And so the logical brain will look at what must be obvious. It's a bit like the example I just gave of the fear of flying, was where that person came in and they had created their own conscious narrative as to why they were the way they were. But the unconscious, which is the seat of the emotion, the seat of the references that that part of the brain uses, it holds on to all the negative stuff, if you like. That has a completely different way of processing these pieces of information, and holds on to things that the conscious, rational thinking part of our brain wouldn't ever look at as being the cause of a problem, because it doesn't make logical sense. And the biggest problem that I have when anyone comes to see me is that they walk through my door and they have got their, or they come on my screen or whatever, and they have created their conscious narrative as to why they're the way they are. And then convincing them to go back into their childhoods to look to find the initial sensitizing events, the origins of these problems, could be quite challenging sometimes, because they have made their mind up consciously that this must be the cause of my problems. And therefore, and very often I can find people come to see me, they've been to half a dozen different therapists beforehand, but all they've ever done is just explored the conscious narrative that that person's come in with, and they don't really make any progress. And that can often put people off of therapy as well sometimes. Yeah, so that's why I work with the unconscious, because I want to know where this thing's come from, what it's linked and connected itself to, what has been the created decisions, beliefs, and meanings that are influencing that person's perceptions, emotions, reactions, behaviors, and all sorts of things. So yeah, that's the distinct differences.
So how should one imagine hypnotherapy? Because whenever I mention it, people start thinking about you like dangling things and spinning the spiral pattern lollipop,
Yes, I know. There's so many different negative perceptions of it. But the thing is, most people are going into hypnosis every single day of their lives, but they don't even realize it. But it's a waking form of hypnosis, if you like, and you get lost in that book you're reading, or you're driving down the motorway and you drive past a known point and you think, blimey, I don't remember the rest of that journey. Where did that go? You're in a waking form of hypnosis. So we're all doing it all the time, but we don't realize it. It's a function that we're all able to access and use. And it's my preferred method to get past that conscious narrative and to get into the unconscious and draw out those memories that the brain is using that's caused these problems and got them to where they are.
So basically hypnotherapy or hypnosis is any time when the conscious brain just checks out a little bit so you can access other stuff easier?
Yeah, I mean, be careful with the word hypnosis, because there are different forms of or different uses of hypnosis, if you like, and what the vast majority, if not 95% of all hypnotherapists do, is what we call suggestion work in the business, where they're just getting the person into hypnosis and then feeding a load of suggestion in the brain that, oh, when this happens, you're not going to do that anymore, you're going to do this instead or whatever. But the way that I work is, rather than throwing a load of suggestion work at something which you're then leaving the real causes of still sat in the background, which there is a potential, I suppose, in the future that it could be re-triggered. I don't know, but ultimately all I want to know is what's caused this problem, what are those decisions, beliefs, and meanings, and then reevaluate that to fix it so that the problem goes away completely. It gets filed away with, what did you have for tea 14 weeks ago on a Tuesday, if you like, and then they won't ever be hampering or creating those negative emotional reactions in triggers that used to get them in a negative way.
So basically you uncover the root cause or the issue. You realize what sort of decision, belief, or meaning you attributed to it. You detach that,
Yes.
draw a different conclusion, and file it away, and that's it?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Well, at the beginning of this, you've mentioned doing some therapy with me, and that I think has been your experience too, potentially.
Yeah, for sure. I just didn't know on a conscious level what was happening. I
Right,
couldn't have
right, right.
broken it down into steps.
Okay.
A lot of people, I think, in the UK as well, but especially where I come from, treat therapy as some like icky subject that is for only soft people and mentally troubled people. What would you tell these people?
Well, actually, I start asking questions. I'd want to understand why they believe that, where that belief has come from in the first place. Why do they think that? For what reason? Some people are scared of therapy because if they change, then sometimes they can lose some secondary gains, payoffs, or benefits that they're getting. Sometimes, like for example, a depressed person might be getting lots of attention from their family members because they're depressed. And so they won't go into therapy in case they get fixed. And therefore, they're going to lose all this lovely attention and fuss that their family are giving them because they're in an uncomfortable mental state, if you like. So, some people can avoid therapy for that reason, and therefore they'll put it down and mock it in some way. And then there are some people that might have, if you like, a be strong script or a driver at work in their mind, and that's especially true for most males because males in this country, it's quite common that when a child's being brought up, excuse me, their parents will say things to them like, "Oh, just punch the bully on the nose; he'll never come near you again. Act your age, not your shoe size. Big boys don't cry." Da 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 da. Now, it's not the surface message that does the damage, it is the underlying message that does the damage. And the underlying message is a matter of interpretation by the unconscious. So, in other words, these drives are getting formed unconsciously, not consciously. So, for example, in that situation where us boys are being told, act your age, not your shoe size, big boys don't cry, man up, and all that sort of business, the underlying message is that of be strong and avoid emotions. So, therefore, therapy, the connotation is that there'll be emotion, and also that, therefore, it's a weakness. I'm broken. There's something wrong with me. And so what will happen is they'll avoid therapy. They'll even put it down or mock it in some way or other. But actually, really, that's more about their fears. There's lots of reasons why a person might want to rubbish therapy. It might be that their siblings are all doing well and they're not doing so well, and they want to avoid going into therapy because if they're going to therapy and the family finds out about it, then that proves they're weak or whatever. There can be many, many reasons, many reasons.
Let's try and start working towards more like a habits kind of topic. Let's say those
Okay.
clients of mine that every day at 10 p.m. they start snacking, and that puts them out of a calorie deficit and they start eating everything every single day. What happens there on a more sort of scientific level, and what can we do about it?
Okay, so what you're describing there is a form of self-sabotage, isn't it? Okay, so what I'd be asking them is, what are you getting out of that? For what reason would you do that when you know that that is absolutely sabotaging you? But it is an unconscious behavior, of course. And I don't know if some of that is probably to do with our hardwiring. So if we're reducing our calories and the body says, I'm hungry, the unconscious says, well, you've got to eat then. When you're thirsty, you get an urge to want to go and drink water. So there's those natural urges, and that's the unconscious at play. But it's that inability to apply the logical brain and say, actually, hang on a minute, let's reason with ourselves here. Actually, I'm on a mission. I'm employing someone and paying them good money to give me advice and guide me, but I'm avoiding that guidance and advice. So actually, what am I doing that for? For what reason? And actually, I need to return back to the pathway I'm on and to remember the end goal. I mean, if you think about any sports person that is training through the off season to prepare themselves for the following year. If they're serious about their competition, then they're going to follow the training program. They're going to get to that place where they can best serve themselves in competition and get the best results they can get. So ultimately, what's the goal? And sticking back to the goal, it's about visualizing that outcome that you want to see. You know, when we have a goal, an outcome that we're looking for, and we're very clear about that goal and outcome in as much detail as we can, then that serves more as a drive than an avoidance, if you like. So when you have a program and you're following a program, it's easier to follow the program. But the moment you then step off the program, it's almost as if the person's then going, well, you know, I've had one biscuit, I might as well have half a packet. What difference is it going to make? I'll get back to it tomorrow. And that, you know, and all they're actually doing is they're playing a game with themselves, and we all play games with ourselves. I play a game with myself on a Friday night when it comes to having a pint of beer or two. Then the
One
game
pint,
starts.
yeah.
Yeah.
So if visualization is so important, what sort of visualization practices did you implement with your Formula One racers, for example?
What I look for with any sports person is what is the goal they want to achieve that year. So you then just go through a standard set of questions, if you like, to uncover whether or not that goal is congruent with their unconscious. So, in other words, have they got anything in the background that's going to sabotage them? Is there a negative belief which is going to steer them off course? Is there negative references in the past that the brain's using and going, well, if I compete at that level, I could have a crash again, or I could hurt myself again, or whatever. So, um, what I'm doing with sports people is I'm making sure that the end goal that they want to achieve is achievable, of course, you know. And yeah, you go through the basic goal setting processes, but I would want to be asking a lot more questions to uncover anything that's actually going to hinder them on their journey. And if they have a clear vision of it, what gets in the way of having that clear vision? We look at what they need resources wise from external, not just themselves, you know, because we all need other people. If you look at any racing driver at any level, they've usually got a psychologist, a driver coach, they've usually got a nutritionist, sometimes they have personal trainers, you know. They might have their own engineer or their own personal or a mechanic that they get along with, that they trust implicitly, that they want to take with them. There's all sorts of things to look into rather than just that own individual psychology. It's also about what goes on around them or other things influence them. So, you know, when you're goal setting, and even in for you and your clients, you know, the goal is about what other people interfere with their processes, what other things come along and get in the way. You know, it's about looking at that broader picture of where these interferences can come from and making sure that everything is congruent. And then once it's all congruent, then you will get to those end goals a lot smoother and quicker and more efficiently than you would do if you weren't very clear in your mind.
You have a document called Advanced Goal Setting, which was also written for sports people. And in there are two questions that I love. One is, what is more important to you than getting this goal? Which is similar to what I ask in my client consultations, which is what is it that you're not willing to do in order to achieve the goal? And the other one is, what is the downside to achieving this goal? I'm guessing uncovering these is important for the same reason, so they
Look,
don't self-sabotage with something on the line.
that is exactly what I've just been talking about. Exactly that thing. Yeah. Those are the sort of questions to uncover any of those little blockages, those little things that they wouldn't themselves logically think about.
You work with general population people as well as a lot of higher performing sports people. What is the main difference in mindset between these two groups?
Apart from the obvious that usually sports people are a lot more driven than the average person is, if you like. Um, in the fields that I normally work at, they are generally anyway. But otherwise, no. The same things can get in the way of a sports person as they do a general population person that, I don't know, wants to maybe start their own business or something and get ahead in life. You know, there still drives to goals, um, but it's about finding out what holds them back from achieving those things, their dreams, if you like. So, you know, it's all really the same sort of principles. Sometimes people will compete because they may be following a father's footstep or a grandparent's footsteps or something along those lines. And they might feel that, oh, my family members have all competed, so I'll need to do the same thing. And if I'm like them, then I'm likable and therefore I'm accepted and loved. So, you know, that could be that reason. Sometimes people might not do particularly well academically, but they perform brilliantly with their physical bodies and achieve great things, and that's the only way they can get on in life and do something that makes them feel good about themselves. There are all kinds of motivators behind these things. It might be, I remember one motocross rider that came to see me, and he was only racing because he took it up as a schoolboy, and he got lots and lots of praise from his father for doing quite well. And so he kept on racing because he was getting the love from his father that he wasn't getting in everyday life. But the father was very proud of him because he raced very well. And of course, when he got into his adulthood, he carried on racing. But then, as soon as his father became ill and unable to attend the races, his interest went. And that's when he come to see me, and oh, I'm not doing very well, da 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 da. But when we uncovered why he was doing it in the first place, he realised he didn't need to do that anymore. So he was able to pack it up and go and spend the time with his family like he should have been, if that makes sense.
So do you always want to work with the towards strategy? Actually, can you explain the whole towards versus away from strategy, please?
Okay. And away from strategy is when we're moving away from something like a fear. The easiest way to describe it is, if you're going through life and thinking about everything that you don't want to have happen, then you have corresponding images of those things in your mind. Those images become the instruction manual to the unconscious. So just as a simple example, a person wakes up in the morning and the very first thing they think to themselves is, oh, here we go, I'm going to have another rubbish day today here, and I'm expecting this to happen. Or this is just going to be another rubbish day. Then straight away, what are they picturing in their head? Whatever the normal things are that don't go right for them is what they're now imagining. And then they'll have the corresponding feelings. So they're not going to be as motivated and get as much out of themselves in that day as someone who wakes up with a completely different attitude. So the away from is thinking about those things that we fear could happen. Then we end up doing those same things. I call it the pothole syndrome. When you're driving down the road and you see the pothole and you keep staring at the pothole thinking, I'm not going to hit the pothole, I don't want to hit the pothole, I don't want to be that, and bang, you hit the pothole because you're staring at it, And so you will go where you look, you will go where you think, you will go where your belief system is focused. So if you wake up in the morning believing that you're just going to have a rubbish day, oh my God, your brain will find that for you. It'll prove it for you. So that's what I call the away from strategy, where we're constantly focusing on the things we don't want to go wrong. And so what will happen is we're more than likely going to bump into those things that we don't want to go wrong. So when we're focused, on the other hand, on what we want to achieve, what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, when we're going to achieve it, etc., that's more of a toward strategy. So it's a paradigm shift in the thinking processes. Because if you're aiming towards something, you're more than likely going to achieve that thing when you're fully focused on it. And as I say, all the goals and everything's all congruent and aligned. And any background negative beliefs, decisions, or meanings that could be influencing a negative reaction or a negative outcome, once they're cleared up and everything's congruent, that person stands a much, much better chance of being on a toward strategy and achieving their goals.
So is it always better to work with a towards strategy? Because I feel like in my life previously, especially when I moved to London, I was super poor. I had a huge away from motivation, and I made pretty quick progress, therefore. Whereas since then, I've been more comfortable. Progress has been slower.
Right. Okay. I remember once being asked to work with a young boy who, I think he was about 10 at the time, and he was doing motocross. And whenever he came off the start line, so the start tapes went up, this little boy had his motorbike pinned to the stop, so it was on full power, and he would literally take off in a straight line down the start straight and go straight on in the first corner. And his family asked me to have a chat with him. So I sit down with this little boy and I say to him, okay, so what is it you're thinking and feeling when you're sat on the start line? Because I don't understand how it is that you aren't making that first corner. So what's going on in your head? What things are you feeling? What are you picturing in your head? What actually, talk me through what's going on in there? And he said, oh, He said, I used to be absolutely rubbish at the starts. He said, I can get off the start line now really quickly. He said, because Dad helped me. I said, how did Dad help you? Well, he said, one day Daddy told me, it was only a couple of years ago, he said, but Daddy told me that what I've got to do is imagine a monster chasing me from behind. And if I don't get away first, then everyone else, then I could get eaten. So I have to get away first. And then that way I could be safe from the monster. So all he was imagining was escaping this monster, and he just went straight on in the first corner every single race. Dusted himself off, obviously picked himself and go, well, back at it again. So that's an away from strategy. What we did instead was worked on changing that to a toward strategy. And I took the monster from him, put it in my pocket, and got rid of it once and for all, so that it was never a problem to him ever again. And once he changed the way he was, his attitude, he was changing his feelings then at the start line. So he was more excited than he was riding out of fear. That's quite an extreme example, but that is an actual real life example.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We have a few rapid fire questions to wrap it up in. Okay. What is a book, in your opinion, that everyone should read?
Martha Stout's book called The Sociopath Next Door.
Why?
Because there are more people who are sociopathic in our society, or of the lower dark triad personality disorder, as some call it in psychology. And it's good to know how to spot them, because there are so many people that come to see me that have had their lives messed up by these sorts of people. So I think it's a good book. It's a good book, and it could keep someone well armed, if you like.
I think you already mentioned this one, but a guilty pleasure.
Yes, the beer. I do like a beer on a Friday and Saturday night, yes.
The one single beer.
Two, sometimes maybe three.
What's your favorite exercise in the gym?
I have two, actually. I do enjoy, for some reason or another, the lat pull down, and I also enjoy a bench press. Yeah, they're my two favorites, I would say.
Nice, upper body, nice. A habit you're proud of being consistent with?
Never ignoring my alarm in the morning. So that's just the first one that springs to mind. I'm always good at getting up and getting on with my day.
A thing under $100, £100 that you cannot live without?
A pen someone gave me out of love, and I still keep that pen and use it to this day. Yeah.
What's your favorite quote?
Socrates said something along the lines of, "The unexamined life isn't worth living." And it's my favorite quote because I keep pulling it out of a little bag every now and again to help someone understand that they need to do a bit of digging. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you care to elaborate on the pen? Or rather not?
Oh, no, it's just, it was a person didn't have an awful lot of money at all. And somehow they managed to get enough together to buy me a Christmas present and get this pen, because it meant a lot to them to give me something that was important. So that for me makes that pen very valuable emotionally, if that makes sense.
Okay.
It's not a very expensive pen at all, but it's what it meant, and it's the emotions and the thought that was behind it and the effort. So that means an awful lot. Yeah.
A thought constantly on your mind nowadays?
No, I must finish that book.
Writing it?
Yes, I started it in 2007.
How far in are you?
I'd say probably about 3/4 of the way through it. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so 6 more years.
No. No. Cancel. I'm getting rid of that thought out of my head. Thank you very much. No, that's gone, that one. You keep that for yourself.
I'm kidding. Thank you very much. I will put Neil's details, website, and so on in the description. Thank you very much for coming on.
You're welcome. Nice to see you, David.